I wanted to ask you about one of the symbols that is a little harder for me to grasp, or I don't know, the symbolistic of community. Because I know of a couple of symbols from Saint Paul talks about the community being a body, and in the Revelation, the community or the church is the bride, waiting for Christ to return. But are there any other symbols for community, or how do you how do you explain community in symbolic thinking or something like that?
Well, I mean, St. Paul has, I think the best way, let's say from our angle, is to understand the images that are given. And so St. Paul gives us an image, but understanding it is different. Like seeing it and understanding it is different. So a way to maybe help you understand the head and the body is to understand that although we have a head and a body, everything that exists has a head and a body. Okay. So everything that exists has a place where the identity of that thing culminates into a point, right? So imagine the body also has a mountain, right? So there you have at the top of the mountain, at the top of the body, you have this origin. And so everything has that, because the problem we have is, the problem is always the problem of why do we think that something is one? That's always the problem which comes out is, you know, why do we think that a chair is one thing? Because a chair is many things. A chair has many components and colors and aspects, and there are also different types of chairs. How do we know? How do we recognize chair? Like, what is it that we're able to see that it's one thing? And a lot of people will think it's funny because they'll think it's obvious because it holds together physically. But we can notice unity in things that don't hold together physically. We can recognize unity across, like I said, across the chairs as well. You can perceive a unity amongst all the chairs, just like you can perceive the unity of a chair. So that perception of unity, how do we account for it? And that is the same thing for everything that exists in the world. And it's the same thing for a community. It's just a community is a negotiation or a breathing in and breathing out between unity and multiplicity. A community needs to have multiple members that are all different from each other, who are bound together by something, which makes you see that they're also one. And so that unity could be all kinds of things. It could be that we all play hockey together. It could be that it could be that we all live in the same place. It could be that we're a family, we have the same father. And then ultimately the church itself shows us the pattern of that, which is that things move into the head, which is the reason. And in the church, it's personified as Christ. And that is the image. And so we, as the body of Christ, we are multiple, but we share in the identity of Christ. And we do that by loving each other. And so the idea of love is the understanding of the bond which holds things together, but doesn't fuse them together. So there's a difference between love and a kind of, let's say, regimental imposition of uniformity, because the community is not uniform. The community has all different types of members. It has more smarter people, dumber people, stronger people, weaker people, people who are more involved, people who are less involved, people who are more central to the community, people who are more kind of on the margin of the community. But there's something which binds them together, and that is love. It's the capacity to be together without destroying the multiplicity, without destroying the difference between things. And then ultimately, then that becomes the image of God himself, because that is why, one of the reasons why Christians have the Trinity, which is the perfection of unity and multiplicity. It is the perfect community. God is the perfect community, perfectly one, perfectly multiple, and without contradiction. It seems like a paradox. It's funny because it seems like a total paradox, but it's a paradox, but it's also the pattern of everything. It's the pattern of all reality. All reality has to find balance between unity and multiplicity, but in God, it's perfectly balanced. It's perfectly balanced in a way where there's even no distinction. There's no contradiction between the two.
Okay, so the difference between community and a group or a collectivity is love. Love, would you say that, or?
Love, and there's love, and there's also the fractal structure that I'm telling you about.
Okay,
Because
okay.
one of the difference between, let's say we can use, it's easy to see it. Like, let's say you take the traditional Catholic Church, the way that it was set up. Okay, you could use anything. Let's just use that, because so you have the church as a totality, with its leadership and the people and the parishes and not just the parishes, but like the districts and the different dioceses or whatever. But then the diocese functions the same way as the whole church. It has a multiplicity of parishes, and then there's a let's say there's an archbishop, and then there are bishops and priests, and then a parish functions the same way as the whole church too. There's a priest, and there's different people involved. There are deacons, or whatever the way. Deacons are old in you, I guess, but there are deacons in the church, and there's people involved, and there's this multiplicity which manifests itself, and there's a hierarchy of participation within the church itself, just like there's a hierarchy in the diocese. Some churches are more important, some are less, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how you tell the difference. The modern state, what it wants to often do is it wants to impose from the top down a kind of uniformity where there's the state and then there's all of us, right? You're French, and then everybody speaks the same language. Everybody has the same schooling. So there's this uniformity, and that is not at all how true community manifests itself.
And
True community manifests itself at every level, and so there is no competition between the family and the church, or family and the village, and let's say the larger nation. There's no competition between these, whereas in the modern state there tends to be a kind of top-down imposition and a competition between, so a desire to eliminate the intermediaries, to have, let's say, control of the identity and then uniformity. Does that make sense in terms of the difference between community and a kind of weird perversion of the modern state, you could say?
Yeah, I want to ask, does this apply to corporations too? Because corporations try to create a structure like this,
Yeah.
but I won't call it a community. A corporation is not a community.
No, I don't think. Well, it can be if they do it right. They can have the right pattern. Like if one of the things that makes some corporations very successful and be able to function is that the let's say the head of the company, they don't have the capacity, let's say, to enforce everything all the way down, and so they have to have a kind of aristocracy around them, just like a king. They would have a board, or they'll have whatever it is that the structure of the company, and then within the company you'll need to have repetitions of the pattern all the way down to the actual worker in the factory or whatever. And so that the remainder of ancient community is probably what makes corporations work very well compared to states. Also, corporations tend to work better than states. But in the military, you see something similar too. You see, a well-ordered military, the general will not tell the troops how to dig their trenches. Right, the general will give strategy, and then as the orders come down the line of the hierarchy, then they will become more specific, and each troop will have its own cohesion and its own team spirit, but that will not compete with their allegiance to the higher level and to the top. And so that type of structure tends to function really well because it does mimic, let's say, more closely traditional community. And so let's say, like in an army, if in the smaller troops there's no cohesion between the soldiers, right? If there's no love, if there's no bond, the word love, it might be a bit strong, but that in the military, for example, they will do a lot of things to try to get the soldiers to bond together at the level at the smallest level of the guys that are directly around them, and that's the driving force of the whole army, right? This bond of the smaller units. And so you could say the same for a traditional community, where the families would be the bond that kind of hold everything together, and then they also are, you know, have allegiance to their clan, to the higher identities.
That's really cool.